And welcome to Two Gray Goatees and a Whistle. I'm your host, Coach Huddy. I am joined by a very special guest, former player from Oregon, Charlie Schumacher. And pleasure to have you here, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Coach. I really appreciate you inviting me onto the show. I've been following it, and yeah, just love talking football and life and military as a whole.
That's great. So, yeah, I want to kind of one of the reasons why I reached out to you is because you're kind of in a unique situation it might not be too unique, but for anybody who coaches in the stateside, coaching abroad in something like football, but not only that, but you're also serving in the military. Thank you. And so you got some unique dynamics as a coach of things that you got to deal with that people on the stateside sometimes don't have to deal with. So kind of want to get your experience, talk about your journey, what got you into coaching, what you've learned, everything like that. You know, so let's get going. So first thing I want to ask you is, you're starting in your childhood. When did you start getting into sports in general? What age were you starting to play sports, and what kind of experiences were you having at a young age?
Yeah, so growing up in rural Oregon, there's not really a ton of organized sports. There's obviously more nowadays than when I was growing up, but really it kind of got started with t-ball. Baseball was really the only thing that kids under seventh grade really had available to us, and so that kind of consumed my summers between t-ball up into minors and majors, and then all stars from there with three older siblings who are all very competitive and played sports or was competitive in other types of activities. I was always on the sideline at the basketball court, on the baseball or softball diamond, underneath the lights, watching my brother play, and just couldn't wait for my opportunity to get out there. And then had the opportunity once I got into middle school, kind of junior high, playing seventh grade football and then basketball as well. And it was a great time. It was always focused around friends going out and spending time together, playing things that we played on recess, and it was just in a more organized fashion, but it was always fun first, and that I really enjoyed while building a competitive edge. We had great coaches between Coach Griffin and Coach Troutman there. They really kind of got us introduced to what it takes to compete and to get better individually every single day. And that was a great youth experience. And then now when I kind of translate it to my kids, they've got so many more opportunities as youth. So my wife and I have been introducing them to different sports from the minute that it's available to them, whether it's wrestling or baseball or basketball, football, flag football, gymnastics. There's just so many more opportunities now for kids than there was growing up. But it just kind of instilled that initial part of getting out, being part of the community, and having a good time with friends.
Nice. So you did talk about some of your key influences there with your coaches. Parents, any of your parents have any kind of influence on you, coaching or just support? Did you have a solid support foundation at home? Because I know a lot of times that helps.
It absolutely helps. And, my siblings and I definitely had that. Mom and dad were always present, big influence. Really, dad always talked about anything worth doing is worth doing to your best ability every single time. And that was something that helped us as a kid because it was never about wins or losses. It was as long as we were doing everything that we could with our opportunities, then that was always good enough for them. And while we would always hold ourselves, be tougher on ourselves and hold ourselves more accountable, we always knew that we were doing well as long as we could, look mom and dad in the eye and say, answer the question. They'd say, well, did you do your best in a win or a loss? And we could say, yeah, we did. Or if we didn't, it was, well, why not? And so it was a lot. It helped, as a kid growing that, intrinsic motivation as well as, self reflection on what could I have done better to help my team or what could I have done better to help myself perform on game day. But huge support system growing up. And then, as I kind of progressed through high school and into college, I had another couple really big influences. And one of them really being he was a defensive line coach when I was at Eastern and the defensive coordinator. He was a Coach Enna. He really kind of held me accountable in the weight room, which was a big shock for me going from, again, small town Oregon. And, we've got 1970s weight room, and he said, if you can't give everything you have in the weight room, then there's no point in really showing up onto the field. And that helped me grow as an athlete, and kind of was that first initial spark of wanting to be a coach, knowing that he had kind of that impact on me. Obviously dad was a coach, and he was my head coach for a couple years in football. And, guys like yourself, always asking us, what can we do? How can we get better? It really kind of came to a head for me in college of, man, these adults are really having a long-term impact on who I'm becoming as a person. And I think I want to be that. And so those were kind of a good handful of influences on, myself just staying in athletics and then kind of getting into coaching.
And that's great. And so, and obviously the higher level you go up, you understand the commitment level and what it takes to play at that level. I mean, you got to really have a passion for it, because, try to explain that to kids in high school and stuff like that like to play at the next level. Or I got middle school kids trying to say that I want to do it at the next level. And then, so, you know, I got, there's one kid, he's complains about weightlifting, or he has his PE class. Oh my gosh, we got to run today. And I'm just like, listen, dude, if you want to be at this level, you got to embrace the suck. So you got to figure it out. And so, and when you get to college, then it's almost like a job, because you are consumed with schoolwork and your sport. And that's whether football, basketball, whatever it is, that takes up most of your time, and that's it. So you really got to love the sport. And, sometimes that's a wake up call. And I've seen players I've coached in the past that they'll go into that and they can't make it the year because there was a lack of discipline on some level. And they decided, oh, I'm not going to be held accountable for not going to school today. And the school doesn't care. You paid the money. And then it shows up. They don't have eligibility. They can't play football or basketball or whatever they're playing. So I think that character development and embracing that, like you have, I think that holds a lot of weight in progressing as an individual. So with that, you decided to join the Air Force. How did that come about? I'm assuming, did you decide to do this after college? Was this something you were thinking about in college? What brought you from going to high school, going to college, and then decided, hey, I want to go serve my country?
Yeah, so it actually started when I was a junior in high school, getting ready to go into my senior year, and life happens. And so, my parents kind of fell on some hard times, some situations that were outside their control. And, so I kind of started looking forward, knowing that I wanted to go to college, and said, I really don't want to kind of burden my parents with this. So how am I going to figure this out? And one day I just got a call from, it was actually an Army National Guard recruiter that, as I'm sitting there at a computer, just like I am right now, called me out of the blue and said, are you thinking about how to pay for college? Yeah, actually I am right now. And it, one thing just kind of led to another. And that was really kind of the first piece was, how am I going to pay for my next level of education? And so I actually ended up starting off in the Army National Guard. I spent about 10 years, a little under 10, a handful of years enlisted, and then I had some fantastic mentors and officers that oversaw, my career and saw some potential to become an officer. And so then I ended up deciding to go to officer candidate school and commissioning. But it was really that phone call and trying to figure out just, you know, almost movie-esque of, right timing and just getting that phone call. But it was once I got to Army basic training and, when I got on the airplane, so 5 days after high school graduation, I'd done a year of kind of preparation drills for the National Guard. But once I got off the plane and then started getting, the full treatment of getting yelled at, get here, stand there, do this, pick that up, move it here, I want to step back. I don't want to be noticed. Just, I'm going to skate by these next 5 months. As long as nobody knows my name, I'm going to be doing great. And day 2, I got called out by a drill instructor for really actually doing that, hanging back. And I wasn't being a full team player. And that being called out in front of 38 other platoon members that I'm going to spend the next 4 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days with really kind of struck home to me and said, no, if I'm going to do this, I need to do it with everything I have. Just kind of going back to the same thing that dad instilled in us kids, and my older siblings held me accountable to. 2 days later, I was put in a leadership role over our entire platoon, and I have two guys that are like brothers to me, and Joe and Chris, and they just said, "Hey, you're who we want in charge. You're going to do this, and we're right behind you." And it just kind of brought back that team mentality, just like being on an athletic club or a team. Of we're all in this together. Let's take it on. Let's move forward. And a handful of weeks later, I was having a one-on-one feedback session with the drill instructor, and I said, "Look, this is really challenging. It's really hard, but I'm enjoying it." My entire intent up front was, I'm just doing this in order to pay for college, and I'm going to go away as fast as I possibly can. And in a matter of 2.5 weeks was, no, I really could see myself doing this for a long time because of that camaraderie, the teamwork, the fellowship, the trust just really resonated with me. And it kind of brought back some of that competitive piece of, we're going to be as good as we possibly can. And then fast forward another, 10 years from there, it was life happens. And I was working actually at, before an ROTC program, and, things just kind of fell through with budget wise. So they had to cut my position. And so I just started applying for jobs, and ended up moving my wife and oldest son, and, he was 1 at the time, to Des Moines, Iowa. Spent a few years in the Army Guard there, and working as a contractor for the Air National Guard. And I kind of got recognized by some people there, and they said, "Look, you really should switch over to the Air Force and come work for us as well." And that just kind of led to that next step. And it was, this is the next journey. This is the next team that I get to help build and support people around me, and got some great opportunities. The biggest one being the opportunity to come here and bring my family to Europe and live here for the last 4 years, and hopefully another several. It's just kind of full circle. Come in at one phone call, sitting at my house as a junior in high school, and just being willing to look at what's on the other side of the door. And I think that's really a testament to how my parents really raised all 4 of us kids, and how us kids interacted with each other, and having great mentors, whether that was teachers or coaches.
You're kind of holding yourself back and kind of just thinking I can just skate by without being noticed. And then, you got called out on it. And then you learn to embrace that mentality, that mindset from there. And you talked about that spark that you had. Is that the point where was that the point where you decided, if you had the opportunity to coach, was that it? Or have you known this entire time that you wanted to coach, you just needed the right opportunity?
So I didn't really know if I wanted to coach or not. I mean, I had the full intent of, once I finished basic training, being in the Guard, of getting to go back and kind of live a civilian life, if you will. I knew I wanted to play college football, and that was on the forefront. So I had, an academic scholarship to go play it, to go to Linfield College and walk on to the football team there. Again, life things happen, and I ended up transferring to Eastern Oregon. It was, I think, the culmination of all my youth sports experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, along with some fantastic coaches like Coach Green and Coach Enna, Coach Shields, Coach Camp, Coach Lovett, that influenced me starting to think, I'm not the greatest football player, but I can relate to people, and I understand some of the trials and tribulations they're going through, not only on the field and transitioning from a smaller high school program into college. So acknowledging that I was not the most successful athlete to make that transition, but it instilled in me of, I want to help other players do that, and I want to help prepare players to make that transition and to go play at the next level, or become a coach and have an impact on another kid. And that was really that point. I mean, it was actually, when I decided to stop playing college football, and I immediately got a phone call from Coach Lovett saying, "Hey, I'm going to go coach at your old stomping grounds. You want to come with me?" And I kind of said, "Well, I'm not so sure I'm ready to be a coach. I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that." And he said, "Don't worry about it. Come in, like, the football part you got. That's fine. You're going to learn how to coach." And that first year was fantastic. I had an immense amount of fun working with Coach, and we ended up one game short of the playoffs. But getting to interact with kids who were born in 2000, whereas being an '80s kid, and and things kind of threw me off at first. Seeing the improvement and kids asking questions and then seeing them go out and demonstrate the things that we instilled in them in practice in a game, and then watching film and saying, holy cow, look at how much better these kids are getting. I know we're not where we want to be, but look at how much better they're getting. That was all it took right there. It was one experience, a handful of kids being excited based on some circumstances. I ended up having to be a solo coach for one game, and that was very interesting and nerve-wracking. And but we ended up with a double overtime win, kicking a 42-yard field goal. But it was at a couple of points in that game where we had to call a timeout, and I could just go out on the field and 11 players are looking at me in the eye, and could tell them, like, this is what they make football movies out of, guys. Like, this is what we live for as an athlete. Like, you couldn't ask for a better opportunity than this one given you right now. What do you want to make of it? And seeing those guys just really knuckle down and give everything they had for their brother on the right and their left, I was 100% hooked from there.
That's great. And for me, it's as you go along, you grow in coaching. Isn't you figure out as you do self evaluations, you figure out, okay, what is something I can improve on. And for me, it's learning that to enjoy the game and making sure the kids enjoy the game first and foremost, and everything else will come to you, and the success will come to you. But making the kids enjoy it and seeing that improvement happen is a wonderful thing. Got to coach rec ball with my daughter, and this summer, and just trying to make the kids understand that they go out and have fun, not don't worry about the wins and losses, because we weren't doing great at the beginning, but the improvement that happened, and then at the end of the season they're finding success, they're finding wins, and they went into the tournament and they did quite well. But working with kids and trying to teach them the part to have fun, when sometimes all they ever see is the outcome and stuff, and that's difficult to try to tell them that you're seeing this small clip of this outcome, you're seeing the end result of that stat sheet, but you're not seeing the piles and piles of hours and years and everything went into getting to that moment. So that's a challenge I think sometimes we as coaches have to deal with, is try to tell them that if you want to get to this point, you got to do this. But if you don't love the game, especially if you're a parent or something, if you love the game more than your kid, that's, you got to realize that, make sure that they're having fun. And I think hearing what you're saying and how you were seeing that work that you put in coaching, and you're seeing that product on the field, that's a real joy of coaching professions. Hey, so here you are, Ramstein Air Force Base. Let's talk about the nuance of coaching on military bases, because I talk to kids. In fact, I was having a conversation with kids this week. I was like, hey, I got to talk to one of my former players. He's a coach over in Germany. He coaches in Germany. There's football in Germany. I go, yeah, there's football in Europe, even though it's not as big as soccer. It's there. So trying to explain that there are professional leagues around there that do play football, and so let's talk about the dynamics of coaching at a military base, especially overseas, and the kids, have this opportunity, because obviously families move there that are in the military. They got to put their kids somewhere. So, a lot of times these military bases, the bigger ones, they have schools. So what is it that is maybe the same and then maybe different being on a military base at a school there, coaching there versus coaching stateside?
Yeah, I think there's some similarities, but it's easier to kind of talk about the differences. The biggest difference being you never really know which kids you're going to have next season. And so as a coach, when you go into a season and you're looking at your freshmen and your sophomores, and you're kind of thinking of your JV program and, how do we develop these kids to end up being varsity contributors? You never know if we're even going to have them the following season. So you really have to kind of start to look at it as 1 year seasons, and you have to pour everything into every player that you have every single opportunity. And that's where I really kind of have to tip my hat to, as a head coach, Coach Hollenbeck. He's retiring after this season, but I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to coach with him these last 2 years. And the thing that I appreciate the most, kind of going back to what we were previously talking about, is he's got three principles, three core values that he's always talked about with the team, and that's to play hard, to have fun, and then respect the game. And based on those three things, if you put your full effort into it, the score kind of takes care of itself, and the outcomes eventually, that success comes. But with not knowing who you're going to have each individual year, it's stepping back and reflecting. As a coach, you could go one of two ways. You could either say, I'm only focusing on, the X's and the O's, and, how are we going to do this year? And then we'll worry about next year. Or you really invest into that player and help them understand that there is trust, and there's faith, and there's belief in them growing, and even if they do leave, you want to see nothing but success from them wherever they end up going. And this season we actually instilled a fourth value, which is kind of build the brotherhood, and that kind of goes into trusting the player on your left and your right. And with military kids, they're growing up moving a lot, and so they have that outlet on the football field of, this is an extension of my family. So we always talk about team first, and your family, like, this is a family when we're here together, not just a group of guys that we practice with and we go and compete with on Friday nights, but it's part of our family. And in particular, with being overseas, there's not as many grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters that might be older there to see you in your development as a player. And so you're really reliant on the other adults and the parents of other players on the team to kind of be that extended family. So I think naturally it's easier to build that cohesive bond and those relationships with players, because there's not as many people. On weekends, if we have an off weekend, or when they're out of season, these guys are going hanging out with each other and their families, that because that's the family that they have. So I think that's one of the key differences between being overseas and then in the States, is these are the only people that we have here around us to rely on. And then when you talk about parents that then have to be forward deployed from here, so now, mom's gone or dad's gone for 3, 4, 5, 6 months at a time. Who do they rely on of if they got something wrong with the house? Yes, they can call the base support folks, or they can call their landlord if they live on base, but there's a deeper reliance on people around us, and those kids always just want to be around each other. And that's something that's very fun to watch grow. And it's been, as a dad, something that I have just absolutely loved being over here and seeing the other guys that, my three kids get to compete with and go to practice with and hang out with after school. And even when some of those guys end up going to a school here in Europe, we'll meet them on the sideline and say, hey, I might not be rooting for your team, but I'm rooting for you, because they're basically like another kid. And that's something a good friend of mine, he just moved back. I say friend, but he truly is family with Coach Levon. We spent more time with each other last year than we probably did with our wives during football season, coaching a youth team and at high school, and watching him as an active duty military member who's been through moving his family multiple times, and seeing how closely he pulls in these other kids as just an extension of his family, was something truly admirable, and something that I'm going to continue to aspire to do. And I think you really only get that within a military community. I think it's, if you looked at living in a small town somewhere in the States where it's all extended family and everybody knows everybody, it's as close to that feel as you possibly could get to. As far as the actual football piece goes, you get smaller rosters than you do. We struggle to find JV games, just because we only play other military installations. Some military installations don't have as many kids as we do here at Ramstein. We're the biggest school in Europe, And so trying to find the opportunities for those younger kids to get game experience and evaluate their growth is a challenge. And that's, I think, one of the biggest differences between overseas and states is there's a lot more opportunities for kids to compete in the states than there is over here. But I think at the same time, the kids over here really recognize their limited opportunities and try to make the most of them.
It's good to hear. So a little bit, let's try to, I'm trying to, because you did touch on, how to create support for the players. And I'm going to go back to that here in a second, but I do kind of want to know, you did talk about being one of the biggest bases there in Europe. What is your typical population? Let's say 9-12. How many kids usually are attending roughly
Yeah.
at,
So
at that school?
Yeah, so I think Ramstein. I think we bounce between 800 and maybe as many as 1,000 kids. I don't think we've been up that high. 9 through 12. I think it's probably much closer to the 800 number. I'm probably going to get a text from a coach at some point and say, no, you're completely off. But they do break up across Europe into different divisions based on size, at 100 kids or 150 kids. And so this year, like from a football standpoint, we had 3 divisions. We had 8 teams in Division 1. And one of the schools is a population of just over 300 competing with us at Ramstein that have over twice that many kids. So you get some pretty large variance. One of the parts that is kind of neat is then you travel a pretty good distance. I mean, we played teams from Italy and the UK this year, which is pretty fun. We've got to travel last year down to Spain. We got to take our JV program down there based on some other teams not being able to have a program. They asked us to come down there. They, found money and gave kids a great experience traveling down there to Spain and play a football game. That part's really pretty interesting is the travel. It's also an extension, or it can be difficult. If you've got a 9.5 hour bus ride, so you're leaving at 11 o'clock at night on Wednesday night, driving all the way through the day, the night, in the morning to Thursday, and then you're staying the night in the school gym to then turn around and be out of the school gym by 7:30 because they've got classes, and finding a way to keep kids occupied and out of trouble and things like that, and then still being able to get ready to compete under the lights in the evening. So that there's some of the logistical aspects of it are pretty interesting for me as well with that.
And so, yeah, so that's, to me, I mean, that to me would be the fun part, because the culture and the different cultures you're going to see, and you get to experience that at a unique level, playing sports. But again, spending on a bus for 8-9 hours, and you probably get used to it, but still it's, you got to figure out that dynamics for sure. And it cracks people up. In the States, it's like, 8 or 9 hours, you could still be in the same state. And then for you guys, you could have crossed 2 or 3 different countries, depending on where you're going. And so,
Exactly. Yeah, and it does also help kind
so
of with the culture building of when you take 35 or 60 kids on a bus, 9.5 hours across 2 different countries to then get on a ferry to go across the English Channel and then drive another few hours of, then once you're at somebody else's place of, are you cleaning up after yourself? There's nobody in this other school needs to be your mom and clean up after you. You need to take care of your own stuff, make sure you're taking care of your hygiene. And that's, so we're able to teach some of those other life lessons to kids of, you leave a place better than you found it, and holding them accountable to it, and then seeing each other hold their teammates accountable is also pretty amazing to see.
yeah, I can imagine. And to me, that would be the fun part, is you're in a unique situation where you get to see a lot of things. I mean, obviously, when you have vacation time, I'm sure you guys, I mean, I've seen pictures of you and your family, and you guys get to go experience some amazing places. And so I'm kind of jealous about you to do stuff like that. So we talked about support. So I kind of want to go back on that and supporting players. And you talked about the family aspect, that this becomes your extended family, because you guys are in such a unique situation versus when you're on stateside, where you might have grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, people in the community know each other. They've been around the same area forever. I mean, there are some cases I can say, like at Mountain Home, they kind of get in a unique situation similar to what you got to do, because some of the kids that come to that school, it's the same thing. Their parents are in the military. So you might have them for a year or two and then they're gone. So there is that fluctuation even at stateside to schools and military. But again, you got families in that area that usually stay together and they'll stay there, where you know, people aren't making lifelong, probably not staying on the military base for 30, 40 years for the most part. I'm pretty sure they probably end up going either back to state or they'll find somewhere else off base after they retire. But that support system, building stability, that how, and I'm sure these kids understand this, and military brats, or what do you want to call them, kids who are live in military families that are on the move, you know is so is this something that you can understand, that the players understand, that the situation when you're at this setting, the school, that hey, this guy that I might be bonding with, he might be gone next year. So what is something you guys do to help support? And you did bring this up a little bit, when those parents are deployed. So mom's gone, dad's there, or dad's gone, you're there, they're off, like you said, for so many months. What are some of the things, and how do you guys support these people, these kids, when that happens? You talked about there is a support system there for the families, but is being the kids being active in sports, does that provide a little extra support, or would it really not really matter whether they're playing sports or not?
I think it does lend a tremendous amount of support structure for the kids. I think the biggest thing that we as a coaching staff have to do is show a lot of compassion and empathy for when that's happening. For example, if it's a Wednesday or a Thursday practice, but mom or dad is getting ready to forward deploy or be TDY, temporary, moved somewhere for a month or something, and say, yeah, go spend your time with your family. Like, it's going to be okay. If I look back at my coach, playing experiences of saying, hey, mom or dad's going to be gone for a while. I'm not going to be at practice for the next couple days. It might be received a little bit differently from a community that's not understanding of what that is. So I think having a tremendous amount of empathy for kids and the family time. We know right off the bat, if there's a holiday weekend, that families are traveling. If we're not playing, they're going to be gone. So don't worry about trying to have a practice. And I kind of tailor that more towards, the 13 to 15-year-old age group that I coach this year. It's, hey, yeah, we're going to have a game next week, but you know what? We're not going to practice on this day and this day because you guys need to go spend time with your family. Go travel. You're in Europe. Like, go do those things because it's extremely important. And football's going to be here when you get back. So I think just having that mentality for players helps them know that they can trust in us as a coaching staff and as mentors to help ensure that they're in a position to succeed on the field. I think some of the other parts, at least, for myself, I always try to make sure that the players can get in contact with me anytime, anywhere. If all of a sudden mom or dad have to go pull a 24-hour shift, it's cool. How you getting to school tomorrow? How are you doing this? How are you doing that? And making sure that they have another, adult that they trust to at least help them, or saying, hey, why don't you come over and just have dinner tonight? I know parents are in an exercise, so they're just going to be slammed. Why don't you come over and spend a few hours, and we'll get a couple more guys over at the house, hang out, watch a movie, whatever. Those are some of the things I know, in the States, talking with other coaches, like, oh man, that could be seen very, in a not good way of, interacting with players. But I truly think it's essential when you don't really know what else is going on in their life, and it could be something significant or it could be something very minuscule, but based on everything else going on in their life is really challenging. Also with that is because they might have really close friends for 2 years, and then all of a sudden all of them leave, they could feel like their entire support system just left. But if they have trust in a coach or trust in a teacher or somebody else, that's somebody they can go talk to and say, look, I'm struggling right now because my support system for the last 2 years all just left. And, I know my kids have felt that firsthand, seeing their best friends leave, but they also have been on the other side of it, of being the kid who is welcoming the person that's just moving in and saying, look, I've been in your shoes. I know this is tough. It was a long move. Let's go hang out. I'm going to go show you the village. I'm going to go show you what's going on base. And it's almost just like they never miss a beat. So it's difficult while the move is happening, but because they've been on both sides of that coin, they're much more receptive of pulling in new kids and saying, hey, you look like an athlete. I'd really like you to come out and play football with us. Or, hey, why don't you come play basketball or come play baseball? And it just naturally kind of feeds. And those bonds become even greater after the fact when people end up moving on.
Yeah, that's a great way of approaching it. And man, they're fortunate to have people like you there, because it sounds like you guys have really built something special. What would be some advice, I guess? So let's kind of shift to how you got to where you're at again, real quick. Let's talk about, what advice would you give young players? Let's say some of the players you got that to become inspiring leaders. What would be advice you would give them? They're graduating. When you get the chance, when you see these kids graduate and they're getting ready for their next journey, and what's some word of advice you give your players for the next step in their life? What would be something you would share with them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think one of the biggest parts is, don't chase perfection, but chase progress. I think, being a youth coach and seeing where things have kind of gone with essentially the professionalization of youth sports can suck that fun aspect of it that we already talked about, is so crucial, that as long as you're chasing progress, if you're always looking to get better, then the next day is going to be a joy. And it doesn't have to just be in athletics. That's, if they're graduating here and moving on, whether they're continuing their athletic journey in college, or just going on academically, or moving on to work, it's, as long as you're chasing progress, you're trying to get better each and every day. At the end of a week, you're going to say, oh man, I've gotten a lot better. I'm showing success. And now that's the kind of person that other people want to be around. And if you're the kind of person other people want to be around, you're naturally going to move in to being put in kind of a leadership role. I guess going back, and all the opportunities that I've had generally have stemmed from people saying, we like being around you. Why don't you lead us? And whether I felt comfortable doing that or not, or wanted to do it or not, didn't matter, because it was everyone else around saying, we trust you because we see what you do day in and day out, and you just keep moving on and chasing progress. You know, leadership through all my military schools and things. There's the LeMay pyramid of leadership, and it was something that I've seen multiple times. And most people look at leadership in kind of a triangle hierarchy, where the leader's at the top of the pyramid. But what General LeMay talked about is, the pyramid is actually upside down, and it's balancing on the point, and the leader is at that point balancing everybody else up above them. And your job isn't to be in charge, but to be charged with taking care of everybody else that kind of points to you. And that's something that's resonated with me through my entire officer career over the last 12 years. Well, that's at least Air Force side, but 17 years as an officer. It's not about being in charge, but taking care of those that you're charged with. And I think as long as you're in pursuit of progress, that becomes very easy. You become approachable, you become trustworthy, and the kind of person that other people want to be around. And every day just ends up being a blast.
Enjoy that. Thank you for sharing that. That's that's incredible. I can tell you, as I coached, and a lot of times it's kind of like, we know what's your measure of success. In anybody I've ever been in contact with, whether it's through teaching or coaching, it's their journey and seeing that success in their life. So seeing people like you, and and the success you've had as a father, as a husband. That to me, that's true success. You know, when I see former athletes and they're finding their joy in whatever they're doing, that means just as much as me as kids I've coached that have gone on to play college and pros or whatever. You know, seeing what you have become and what you're doing is really special, and I'm glad that somewhere along the journey I was able to have contact with you, and it's really great to be in contact with you. Future goals. Let's talk about, before we go to our next segment, what kind of plans you got going on? How much longer do you got before we kind of talked this off show, but what do you got plans for coaching? What's your plans after military life? Because I'm sure that's coming up here sometime. What's your plans?
Yeah, yeah, definitely can't be in the military forever. So at some point, I got to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, as we, say in the military so often. I was actually asked this question last year at the end of the football season, and right as I was getting ready to move right into coaching youth basketball and then eventually baseball, and it just kind of never ends. I said, if I could retire from the military and be a coach full time, it would be the greatest opportunity. And I would say, where do I sign? How do I do that today? Because to me, the biggest joy that I get is when I run into a former player 5, 10, 15 years later, and the first thing they say is, "Hey coach." That to me is the pinnacle of success as a coach. When someone still calls you coach after, never, not seeing them for a decade, because that was a positive experience for them. My dad, when he retired from being an administrator and a teacher and a coach for over 30 years, 40 years, talking with him this summer, he said, I'm kind of working on finding that purpose. And his purpose in life now is to make somebody's day better every single day. And I think that's the epitome of great coaching, is really, if you make somebody's day better every single day, then you're being successful, because that means somebody's not stopping doing what they think they enjoy or what they know they enjoy because of a bad interaction. So, when I look at, maybe another handful of years in the military, obviously my family wants to stay over here. My oldest wants to graduate over here, and then we'll kind of see from there. But I definitely know wherever I end up, whatever area of the States we end up moving back to, coaching is going to be there. And the big part of that is, I also have to say, my wife is the ultimate coaching spouse. She knows that when football season comes around, I am not available for a lot of things based on hours and hours of film study and practices and getting to and from and coaches meetings, and being available for all these players that, really I try to, treat as one of my own kids. Coaching definitely will be the forefronts in kind of that drive wherever I end up after my military service.
I like it. So yeah, you end up coming back stateside, hit me up. I could
Absolutely
find some jobs for you around here. Love to have you in the area, man. All right. Next segment. I always do this segment. It is called Unusual Sports Mascots. So usually I pick a mascot from a different state, different high school, and we always talk about, the history behind it, and some of the ones I've had. I just did one on the Bucking Elks, at a school out of this town out of North Carolina. Around here, I've said before, the Maniacs up in Orofino, the Lava Bears in Bend, cheese makers in Tillamook, done stuff like that. So I decided to do something a little different. You're in Germany. I decided, hey, let me see if I can find any unusual German mascots. And I didn't care if it was high school this time. I was just looking for whatever, but I did find one story that came up. So I'm taking you about 2.5 plus hours north of you to Cologne. And so we're looking at football, as in soccer football. And we are looking at the FC Cologne's mascot. It is Hennis the goat. So there is a story. So there's this goat that becomes this mascot for this soccer team. And so what we got is 1950, February 13th, this carnival was in the area, and the owners of the directors of the carnival the wife, Corolla Williams, she presented the soccer coach, the club, a young billy goat as a gift, kind of like a humorous gift, but also a symbol of good luck. And why the goat? It was a mascot of bringing good fortune. That's kind of how it kind of all started out. And it started out kind of as a joke, and it ended up turning into a lifelong tradition that they've had this goat. And so since 1950, Hennis the goat, we're on to Hennis the Ninth. And according to the story is that this Circus Williams employees at the end of World War II, there was a goat that was born. It became Hennis the First in 1950. It was given as a gift after a home match. The fans embraced it immediately. The club soon gained its nickname called the Billy Goats, and the goat became the central part of the team's identity, eventually added to the club crest alongside the Cologne Cathedral. After Hennis died in 1966, the tradition continued with the second, third, fourth, and so forth. And now we're all the way up to the ninth. So that is our mascot of the week. The mascot itself lives in the Cologne Zoo. He has his own stall and is recognized as this rallying mascot for their soccer team. So he gets to get the treatment and he gets taken out on the field. They have him go around the pitch and so forth. So, yeah, there you go. The Billy Goat, Hennis the Ninth, is our mascot of the week. Charlie, anything else you want to say before we go, man?
And Coach, it's been a pleasure getting to do this segment with you. Definitely a little outside my comfort zone for it. But I think the biggest part is, what I appreciate about, you kind of doing this podcast and talking about youth coaching so much is that there's just a massive need for kids to be active from their social life to, physical attributes and things that it's a calling that I hope more people that you end up interacting with and that I interact with and, the rest of my days get a calling for, because it really doesn't take a lot as long as you care. So again, I greatly appreciate it. It was great catching up with you and kind of sharing my story.
Hey, anytime, man. All right, that'll be it. Thanks again for listening. I want to thank all of my listeners that do listen. I've even had people over in Europe been listening, Australia. I've had people up in England, a couple different places. So I appreciate it. Indonesia seems to be a hot spot for some reason, India, so forth. So I appreciate all the guests stateside and abroad. Thanks again.